February 2nd on the Just Baseball Show. It's a new month. Arm Layton and I'm Peter Apple. In this episode, top 10 best pitches from 2022, as well as the top 10 worst pitches from 2022. I wrote two articles, one on the best, one on the worst. We have some just missed. I'm excited to get into this. We haven't done top 10 pitches, but I'm excited to. Arm, what's going on, my man?
Yeah, man, I had fun kind of, one, reading through the article and going through everything that you dug up. And then two, kind of cross-checking with some of the data on the back end and queuing up some of the longest home runs, which we'll talk about on the bad pitches. And then just queuing up some nasty whiffs on some of these best pitches, because the one cool thing is with Savant, you can kind of go and sift through video, right? And you can click random video and it'll give you a foul ball on a Tuesday in July, or you can go Ks, home runs, whatever. And you can just see a lot of nasty stuff with the positive that we're going to talk about. And then you can see some nukes with the negative that we're going to talk about. So I'm excited to break that down.
Me too. And we have so much top 10 type content coming. This is only the start, right?
Yeah.
I'm coming out with my top 100 players as Just Baseball. As the company, we're coming out with our top 10 by position. We have college baseball rankings. We have fantasy baseball rankings, the whole nine here on the Just Baseball Show as we lead up to the 2023 MLB season. So before we start both lists, we'll start with the worst pitches going 10-1. Then we'll proceed to the best pitches 10-1, but I want to make it clear how I rank these. They're not ranked by my opinion. These are pitches strictly from the 2022 season, and they're ranked by run value, total run value. And run value, it's a stat to define the run impact of an event based on the runners on base, outs, ball, and strike count. It's a great way to define the impact of a pitch when it comes to run production. And a pitcher, you want a negative run value on a pitch, which means that particular offering subtracted a certain amount of runs. We can look at the highest velocity, we can look at the pitches with the most movement, but these are the pitches that either increased overall value or decreased overall value. So while you might find one reliever, I remember when we were talking about that Mets reliever with the 104 mile an hour cutter or whatever he had. It's
Montes de Oca.
Yeah, that pitch in itself is probably nastier than some of the pitches on the best pitches list, but he didn't throw it 40% of the time. He didn't throw it over a 200 inning span to see the entire value of the pitch. There were probably worse guys who came up for 4 innings from the minor leagues, threw a fastball and it got bombed, but it's not as bad as a guy who went the entire year, had a 5.5 ERA, and he was throwing that pitch a ton, right?
I think what it really boils down to, because you're 100% correct, it's there's a difference. And usually, if you think about a Venn diagram, usually nasty and effective overlap a lot, but the nastiest pitch doesn't necessarily mean it's the most effective pitch. So these are the overlapping of nasty and effective when we talk about the top pitches, because it looks really good, like a Dylan C slider or some of these other pitches that we're going to talk about, but also they locate it well, they use it a lot, and they use it effectively. And that's the most important part for, these pitches to accumulate a negative run value and keep runs off the board. So that's what makes this really fun. And it's interesting because you get these pitching ninja, GIFs and pitching ninja videos of some of the best and nastiest pitches you're going to see. But some of these pitches are maybe not ones that frequent as much. So especially the fastballs. That's what I'm excited to talk about, because there's some fastballs that are that invisible, and people might be surprised by some of the pitches that are on this list.
Totally agree too, because you watch a pitch like Brusdar Graterol, who throws a 102 mile an hour sinker or something like that. It moves like crazy. It's at insane levels of velocity, but it doesn't produce the swing and miss you might think. It doesn't even produce a lot of soft contact. And while it does produce plenty of it, it may not be as much as you think. So this is by the numbers. We took our eyes out of it and found the most valuable pitches and the least valuable pitches. So we're starting with the least valuable, and we'll start with the just missed. So 5 who just missed this list: Nick Pavetta's curveball, that had a 16 run value. That means 16 more runs than normal. Terrible pitch. Kyle Wright's four-seam fastball. We saw him use the sinker a lot more, and that curveball is one of the best in baseball, but his four-seam fastball, it's not it. Vladimir Gutierrez's four-seam, kind of easy because he just got bombed his entire year, and he was using the fastball a lot. It was a bad fastball. Luis Head's four-seam fastball, I don't know much about him. Bad pitch. And Ryan Feltner's four-seam fastball for the Colorado Rockies. Should we get to number 10?
Let's do it.
Number 10, Dallas Keuchel's cutter. Comes in with a 16 run value. And Arm, in my opinion, this is the worst pitch in baseball. But the only reason it lands at 10 is because Dallas Keuchel made 8 starts and he only threw the pitch 178 times. And every other pitch on this list, they threw it at least 750 times. So that's what's crazy.
Yeah.
It's still made the top 10 worst pitches because opponents slugged 1,000 against it.
Yeah.
1,000. Like Aaron Judge had like a 650 slug. Opponents slugged 1,000 off it. 455 batting average. Not even like Ty Cobb gets there. And it was his third most used pitch. If I'm a pitching coach and the theme of these articles is throw your best pitches more, throw your worst pitches less, throw it 15.3% of the time, I'd lower that to 0 if I were his pitching coach.
You know, it's amazing. So the analogy for this, for those like listening, that might still be like trying to understand how Dallas Keuchel's pitch, you know, with a 1,000 slug can only be 10 here. It's actually extremely impressive that it's at 10, like you said, Peter, because I would liken it to a player being in the top 10 in WAR in like 50 games, let's say, like because it's a cumulative stat. So
kind of Adley Rutschman as a catcher. It's the opposite for Dallas.
Yeah. Like imagine that, like a guy being in the top 10 in WAR despite playing 30 or 40 games. That's basically the opposite of what Dallas Keuchel did with the cutter. So, basically got bombed every single time. And it's because it was a pitch that was good back when it was, you know, in the upper 80, low 90s. But, you know, now at a lower velocity, it just doesn't have enough going for it, right? A cutter is supposed to tie you up as a righty, and you're not getting tied up by 82. So that's exactly what happened with Dallas Keuchel last year. And I think he's still trying to throw, man. I don't think he's giving it up. So I know this would be good for not gambling advice, because I know you will be fading Dallas Keuchel every start he gets. So let's see if he gets a few more starts this year. Obviously, I hope he comes back and throws 94. That'd be super cool.
Won't happen.
But I'd imagine that you are going to be betting on the other side of that when that time comes.
You hoping Dallas Keuchel throws 94 is like you hoping that one of us just randomly starts throwing 90 and can make an independent ball team. But talking about the velocity of that pitch in general, Dallas Keuchel's cutter, average velocity 85.2 miles an hour, exit velocity on the cutter 90.2 miles an hour. Yeah, so it's going out 5 miles an hour harder than it's coming in on average.
It's
terrible.
Not good.
Number 9, Jose Barrios of the Toronto Blue Jays. His fastball at number 9, 17 run value. So his fastball, and you guys have talked about it on previous episodes before, it's always kind of been an issue, but it really hit the fan this year.
Yeah.
He threw it 27.9% of the time, allowed 11 home runs on the fastball alone. And just to put that in perspective, his teammate Kevin Gausman allowed 15 home runs the entire season. Opponents hit 349 against it with a 618 slug with an average exit velocity of 91.8 miles an hour. And it's not just the shape, it's not the velocity, it's not the release point. I mean, all of those are factors in it, but it's the command. We've talked about this before too. He just serves up a 94 mile an hour fastball on a platter and says, hit it as far as you want. It's consistently middle. So it's 94, right? Looks great in terms of velocity, but it just gets demolished, especially last year, especially 349 against the pitch, dude.
Yeah, it's really bad. And it's funny because you're able to kind of see, like, I specifically looked at Barrios's, like, I wanted to queue up every home run that he gave up on the fastball. And almost every single time target was like down and away, or target was, you know, up and in, or wherever it may be, wasn't where it ended up. and you just see the catcher's glove go right back to the middle of the plate. Like it's the worst miss you can have. You're better off spiking 130 feet than just grooving it down the middle. But what's amazing is this wasn't like just, oh, the target was just put it over the plate. I mean, there's always going to be a target set up somewhere else, especially in these games with Barrios. Like you could legitimately see the catcher set up somewhere else. Ball runs right back over the middle, home run. Almost every single one of the 11 home runs. Maybe one or two were just good swings on decent pitches. The sinker's not good either, but it's better. And I think if you're going to miss a spot with a sinker, usually it'll run down. You can get a ground ball rather than missing with the four-seamer. It's right down the middle. Look at Baseball Savant. Look at the heat map of his four-seamer. It's just right hot in the middle. I wonder how much he's going to throw this pitch next year, Peter, because I'm thinking about it. And, the sinker, again, not great, but easier to skate by with and easier to get away with misses with. I wonder if we're going to see more sinker, less four seam. Obviously, he's aware that this is one of the worst pitches in baseball this past year. And I think we'll be able to kind of tell what kind of Barrios we're going to get based on how much he uses this pitch, because like you said, it's always been a problem. And I don't see it getting any better. It's more about tweaking the arsenal.
Because it's not like this year it was just way out of whack and terrible. Like it's always been his worst pitch, but it's just he threw it a decent amount of time. And this year, especially that horizontal movement, it would come in on lefties and then just drift over to the middle of the plate, or he'd try and throw it on the outside corner to righties and it would drift into the middle of the plate and just got freaking tanked to the moon.
Yeah.
All right. Number 8, Joanna Doan of the Washington Nationals, his four-seam fastball, 17 run value, the same as Jose Barrios' fastball for those Blue Jays fans out there. He threw 5 different pitches in 2022, Joanna Doan did, and for some reason he decided to throw his worst pitch 65.5% of the time. Just goes to show the Nationals' development, and they're just not giving their pitchers a good game plan out there, because the fastball is so bad and it keeps getting destroyed, but yet they keep calling for it. His curveball is also bad, but the fastball is what makes the list. Like I said, average is 95, so it may not look too bad, but it's got that same type of horizontal movement as Barrios's. And when you don't have command of the pitch, that's when it just gets bombed, because it just leaks into the middle of the plate. Like Joanna Doan was one of baseball's worst pitchers last year, which makes sense that his most used pitch makes the top 10 worst pitches of 2022.
Yeah, it's bad when, I talked to a couple guys that faced him in the minor leagues. They just said it was easy to pick up out of his hand. And, you wonder if with a Doan, because he's talented, 95 miles an hour, and it's pretty effortless. It's almost too effortless, where it's really easy to pick up, but he doesn't really trust any of his other pitches. The curve, the change, the slider, like none of those pitches were around the strike zone in the big leagues and in the minor leagues. So he was forced to fall back on that fastball, and guys were just sitting on it. So yeah, it got teed off on at pretty much every single level. And that was, part of the problem for him this past year. And I forgot to mention on the first couple guys, I have the longest home runs of the year against that pitch. And for a Doan, Jock Peterson hit a 441-foot homer at 109 miles an hour against that fastball last year. So, I mean, that's a nuke. And that wasn't the only nuke he gave up.
But an even worse fastball than that, Kyle Bradish of the Baltimore Orioles, his four-seam fastball last year at a 19 run value. The difference is Bradish has a really good slider. It was one of the better breaking balls last year, but his fastball sucked. I want him to start using his slider a lot more, letting his fastball take a back seat after posting a 4.89 ERA in his first year. We saw him be really, really bad in the kind of first half and leaking over the All-Star break, but those past couple of months, he really started pitching better because he started throwing that slider much more. And the slider is nasty, and the fastball can reach 96. So the issue isn't velocity. It appears to cut slightly, but it's always cutting right into the barrel. And it just gets hit so freaking hard, averaging 91.3 miles an hour in exit velocity. Like I said, against the slider, opponents hit 212, against the four-seamer, 321. And kind of similar to Barrios, we saw Bradish start throwing his sinker a little bit more, because it's clear Bradish knows his fastball is getting destroyed. The Orioles know his fastball is getting destroyed. So they're like, we have to change this up. I'm excited for him next year because, like I said, I don't think a lot of pitchers in the American League have a slider as good as him. but almost every single one of them has a fastball that's better than him.
I was gonna say, especially on this list, I actually think Bradish can be pretty good. And that's what's fun about this. We always say we don't love like just highlighting the bad things about players. But what's fun about this is some of these guys, like this is the missing piece, right? Tweak it, use it less. Like some of these guys can still be good arms. Some of them, might not be as rosy. I think just the last guy we talked about compared to Bradish, very different. Bradish just turned 26. And you talk about how the pitch usage kind of changed as the year went on. Over his last 10 starts, he used the slider as much as he used the fastball, both right around 35% of the time, and had a lot of success with the slider. So if that's a pitch that he could still get away with that level of usage with how well he commands it, and then, like you said, started using the sinker more, that can be something that, makes his arsenal just slightly better and could be the difference between him being a 4.8 guy and a 4.1 or 4.2 guy ERA wise. And that's the difference between a swingman or a guy that struggles to break a rotation and, a pretty solidified number 5 starter. So I think Bradish can be a solid back end of the rotation starter. And, the Orioles really need that. And Bradish is one of the guys I actually believe in a little bit more than some of the other arms that they have in the fold there. And I'm interested to see if he continues that trend. But I think it was extremely encouraging, like you mentioned, Peter, that we did see a tweak in that pitch usage, and it wasn't a coincidence that he had much more success down the stretch.
At number 6, Kris Bubic's 4-seam fastball is at a 20-run value. This pitch sucks. It's not a pitcher that, one season it was, decent, and then the next. I mean, it's just not that good of a pitch. His ERA has gotten worse and worse over the last 3 seasons, and it has a lot to do with the usage of the fastball. His worst year was 2022 when his fastball was at its absolute bottom. He was throwing it harder than ever, but it got hit harder than ever. His average velocity of the fastball, 91.8. Average exit velocity, 90.8. Opponents hit 348 against his fastball. So many doubles, so many bombs. And it has similar that horizontal movement, but it leaks over the zone. So a lot of these guys, it's not just the physical aspect of the pitch. It's the location. And when you combine bad location with bad pitch shape and not high velocity, and Kris Bubic, one thing he does have working for him is he has this not herky-jerky kind of windup, but it does have some deception there. And I think that's the only reason it's not the worst fastball in baseball last season, because it did show flashes occasionally of being a decent pitch. 2021 especially, but this year, I mean, no wonder he had a 5.3 ERA. His fastball was getting freaking ballooned on him.
Yeah, and he was throwing it a lot, right? I mean, he threw it half the time. So it's tough because they really needed Bubic, and Bubic showed some flashes in the minor leagues, but with the lack of plus secondary pitch, and then the struggles with the fastball, it doesn't look great for him. And I mean, the Royals. It has not been good with that organization outside of Brady Singer when it comes to development. So it's unfortunate because Bubic looked like a guy that could have been one of the arms to finally break out. And then the big leagues really just kind of proved as a big difference in terms of that average stuff just not playing up the same way at the big league level. And the fastball was the biggest example.
Another fastball, Arm's favorite player, Austin Gomber, comes in at number 5 with a 21 run value. He was the main piece in that Nolan Arenado trade. And I think his fastball is kind of a perfect symbol of how that trade has aged. And
I think the data's wrong, by the way. I actually think that this is a glitch in the system. And Austin Gomber is being I don't know if you saw some of the stuff about Jaren Jackson Jr. and the stats being tracked improperly with the blocks and how the DPOY Defensive Player of the Year thing is a whole sham. That's how I feel about Austin Gomber's fastball. I think you did my guy dirty, and he's out to prove it. He's out for blood this year. I do love that the GIF you used in the article, though, was Pujols hitting a homer off of him. But, that's the only guy. Only Hall of Famers are hitting home runs off of Gomber.
Here's the data point for you. Opponents hit 376 against it. That was the highest on this list outside of Dallas Keuchel's cutter. And what I would say is the eye test matches the data. Nothing is appealing about this fastball. Doesn't produce whiffs, doesn't put away guys. It's slow. It doesn't have movement, and it doesn't produce soft contact. And guess what he doesn't do? Locate it well either.
No.
It's a very bad fastball. This
Yeah.
was the number one guy in the Nolan Arenado deal, and the Rockies paid the
They
Cardinals.
paid a lot of money.
Isn't this fastball a perfect symbol of the trade? I think
Yes,
so.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's ironic too, because hitters were actually better than Nolan Arenado off of the fastball with the numbers that you put up here. The one thing Gomber does have going for him, and it's the reason why he's able to like keep his ERA out of double digits, because I do really think that
ERA
this guy
out of double digits. Are you kidding?
Because the fastball is legitimately like an 8 ERA pitch, right? You just broke that down, but the slider is actually pretty good. And to have that success with the slider at Coors Field is pretty impressive. The changeup isn't that bad, and the curveball isn't that bad. Like, if he could find a way to have a kind of bad fastball, I think he could actually be a pretty good starter. And the big reason why I like him is that the slider, he adjusted it, and it really plays well given the environment. Most players, don't get that kind of movement on their slider at Coors Field, even though it affects vertical movement more. But yeah, his fastball straight as an arrow at that altitude, and that's the big problem. But Gomber does have good enough secondary stuff, I think, to be a competent starter. I really do believe that. But yeah, the fastball is a problem.
It might just have to be outside of Coors Field. At number 4, Josiah Gray of the Washington Nationals, his four-seamer, 22 run value. Remember, he was the main piece in the Max Scherzer trade from the Dodgers to the Nationals, and it's gone about as well as you can imagine with Josiah Gray's fastball at number 4 on this list. He started 41 games in his career, and his ERA is 5.17, and it has a lot to do with how bad that fastball is. Opponent slugged 738 against it. That's the highest on this list outside of Dallas Keuchel's cutter. It has a decent amount of horizontal movement, but guess what? We're talking about the same issue. He doesn't locate it well. It doesn't have any induced vertical break or anything to give it a rising effect. It is a flat fastball, 94 to 95, that leaks into the middle of the zone and gets tattooed more than basically any other fastball on this list due to the sheer slugging percentage of it just getting rocked for extra base hits.
Yeah, this was one of the bigger surprises to me, man. Because Gray was a prospect that I was really high on it, and I'm not giving up on him by any means, right? This guy has good stuff, and he's an athletic pitcher. He's extremely young, and he's in an organization, as we've talked about, that just hasn't done a great job of developing arms of late, or just really developing much at all. Though I do think they're heading in the right direction now, finally. The fastball, though, as I kind of went back and looked at some of the data in the minor leagues, if I knew what I know now, which of course hindsight's 2020, but going back and looking at some of the advanced data in the minor leagues that I didn't have at my disposal then, it was getting hit in the minors pretty good. It was, but he was able to get away with it because, one, it's mid 90s, so he'd overpower more mediocre hitters, and then 2, he's got a really good curveball and slider. They blend together a little bit, but he's got really good breaking balls that he was able to just get guys out all the time with. So that was something that I think wasn't on his radar in terms of the fastball until he got to the big leagues, because he got away with it. He was able to dominate minor league hitters. So I'm really interested to see how a 25-year-old Josiah Gray bounces back from this. You still have the good breaking balls. You still are extremely talented and very athletic. And he was a shortstop in college before he converted to the mound. So this is a guy I still really believe in, but this was a wake-up call for him. It's going to be interesting to see how he transitions and how he responds, because clearly it wasn't something that got any better as the year went on. You wouldn't be in the top 5 on this list if it got better as the year went on. That's how Bradish stayed out of the top 5.
And similar to Bradish, similar to Brios, really good secondaries, like you mentioned. The curveball and the slider, I know they kind of blend together sometimes, and it's hard to decipher which one is which because they come in at a decently similar velocity, and there isn't a huge change in movement where you're like, oh, that's a big 72-mile-an-hour looping curveball versus an 86-mile-an-hour slider. It's not like that, but both of those opponents hit under 200 against his curveball and his slider. So similar to those guys, if he can figure out the fastball, he has a bright future ahead of him.
Yeah,
this absolutely. Is now back-to-back seasons of a really, really bad fastball. And you said it yourself, in the minor leagues, the data wasn't great on it. So we'll see how he progresses. Next on the list, fellow teammate Patrick Corbin's slider, 23 run value at number 3. Corbin's been the worst qualified pitcher in Major League Baseball for a while now, and it has a lot to do with the slider's drop-off in production. It does have the highest whiff rate on this list because it is his best secondary. For all those watching on YouTube, I'm using quotes because it used to be, but now it's routinely distributed for extra base hits. 23 and 175 at-bats led to a 571 slugging against. Like I said, in 2019, opponents only hit 158 against his slider. But the Nationals, Corbin himself, decided to throw it less because now opponents hit 309 against it. And now he's put together back-to-back seasons with an ERA over 5.75. It's very rare to see a slider make this list, but for how often he threw it on 2-strike counts, you could tell the value of the pitch was the third worst in 2022. And that's why he's got an ERA near 6. That's why he's been one of the worst pitchers in baseball, because that slider went from a really good slider, really good out pitch, to one of the worst pitches in baseball. And he's not getting his fastball by anybody. And that's why he gets crushed. His slider sucks.
Yeah, it's pretty wild because even when he was kind of bad and struggling, like you said, that was still kind of the pitch that worked for him. But now that was pretty much the final straw, right? It was like, okay, if the slider is not working for him at this point, he's got nothing really going for him. And it's tough to watch because, I am glad that Corbin got his money before he really hit this wall. And he's an awesome story. He's a guy that didn't really start playing baseball until, late in his high school JUCO route. Syracuse kid as well. Not very much a baseball pipeline in that regard. But yeah, Corbin, I don't see this changing, unfortunately. And you go across his entire arsenal: 309 against the sinker, 309 against the slider, 350 against the four-seamer, and 380 against the changeup, batting average wise across the board. Like, there's not using one pitch more and the other pitch less that's going to help him here. Like, I don't really know what's going to happen for him to be able to find success again, but hopefully he does, because the Nats are going to keep rolling him out there every 5th day. I think that's been made very clear until his contract is up, or until they have a team that's actually competitive and cares about win-loss results.
Another pitcher that just keeps getting rolled out there, and his effectiveness has crashed and burned over the last few seasons. It's Madison Bumgarner's 4-seam fastball, 24 run value. I mean, remember in 2014, it's one of the best postseason pitchers of all time. Opponents hit 205 against his fastball. Last year, opponents hit 326 against it. It's dropped 2 miles an hour in velocity, has no natural movement. It's his second most used pitch to his cutter, which also surrendered a 306 batting average against. But the curveball and the changeup, by the numbers, they're still getting the job done. But everything that he throws hard, like everything above 86, just gets hit to the freaking moon.
Yeah.
Like if I'm facing Bumgarner, like you and I, Peter Apple and Aram Layton, I'm just not swinging at anything slow. I'll let the curveball, the changeup, just let it pass me by. If you can throw it for a strike, you tip your cap. Beat me with the cutter and the 4-seamer. I mean, we would strike out because we suck, but he's not getting it by big league pitchers or hitters at all. It makes sense. It's number 2 on this list. It's getting crazy.
Yeah, 80, another slow cutter, right? And the only guy.
It's the 4-seamer. It's the 4-seamer and the cutter both getting.
No, but I'm saying like the cutter was a pitch he used more. It's a slow cutter, and then I think after that, all he's got is a 91 mile an hour fastball. So those were the 2 pitches that he used the most. So you're sitting between 87 and 91. And like you said, just letting him kind of locate the slow spinners if he can. And if he can do that 3 straight times, like, you're not worried about that though, too, because you can react and throw your hands at a 79 mile an hour curveball, even if you're fooled, if you can keep your weight back. And all these big league hitters are able to control their body well enough. Mad Bum, this is a guy I don't mind, being harsher on. Yeah, I'm not the biggest Mad Bum fan. I think anyone who listens to this podcast knows that I like to make fun of Mad Bum. What's amazing too is you look at the GIF that you picked in the article, and it's Mookie Betts hitting a home run on a fastball that is maybe on the outside corner. It's kind of painted, and it's just so not good. It's like it came out of like the iron. It's like it looks like it's legitimately straight on a line out of the like perfect pitching machine, that just serves it right up. And Mookie's still able to hit it out to dead center, even though it's on the outer black. And that's when you know a pitch just doesn't have much to it. The furthest home run that Mad Bum gave up on his four-seamer last year was a 446-foot homer from Byron Buxton at 114 miles per hour. That is a nuke. It was an absolute rocket from Byron Buxton there. And the other one I always think of is Max Muncy hitting that bomb off of him. And then Mad Bum got all upset about it, and Muncy told him he can go fish it out of McCovey Cove. That was a classic. But yeah, that's a nuke. And Mad Bum, I don't see anything changing anytime soon. That Savant page is rough to look at.
Yeah, it's as blue as the ocean. You want to talk about a nuke-a-lour? The number one worst pitch of 2022 is Chad Kuhl's sinker on the Colorado Rockies. Not only was it the worst pitch by total value last season in terms of run value, it's also the worst pitch in a single season since Baseball Savant started tracking total run value back in 2019. The sinker had a 53.7% hard hit rate. For reference, Aaron Judge had a 54.7% hard hit rate in 2017, where he set the rookie record for home runs. Chad Kuhl finished the 2022 season with a 5.72 ERA. Makes sense. Sinker was the most used pitch. Doesn't really have movement. Averages 92.8 miles an hour on it. Regularly, opponents hit it harder than it comes in, which you don't see often, especially when it's coming in at 93, but it's leaving the bat at an average exit velocity of 93.9. Opponents hit 367. So Joe Mauer in his best year against the sinker and only swung and missed 11.8% of the time. I would shelve that pitch if I were you. Chad Kuhl, it sucks. It was the worst in baseball in 2022.
Especially sinkers in Coors Field. It's tough. It really becomes just a straight fastball for some guys. And that's exactly what it was for Kuhl. What's interesting is Chad Kuhl's slider is actually good. Another guy that horizontal movement works really well for him out there. But what's interesting is the sinker usage skyrocketed last year, right? Like he used it more than ever when it was a pitch that was the worst in baseball. So that's what makes it really interesting for me. Is you look at 2021, 346 batting average allowed, and he says, fuck it, I'm going to use this thing 3 times as much. He went from 13% usage to 42% usage. And maybe that was a way to try to combat the altitude at Coors Field. But the thing is his ERA was actually worse on the road. Again, Kuhl's slider alone is enough for him to be an option as a 6th or 7th inning reliever. Like that guy could come in and just throw that slider and be a decent middle inning reliever. And I think that's what ultimately will be what gets him back into the big leagues and get him to survive in the big leagues. So at least he has a pitch going for him. And literally, if you're a reliever, if you're Chad Kuhl and you go to the bullpen, just get rid of this pitch and you're going to be in much better shape. The furthest home run he gave up, 464-foot homer to Tommy La Stella. Yes, it was at Coors Field, but still, that's a nuke off the bat of Tommy La Stella on that sinker.
So the GIF I used, do you see, was Michael Harris hitting that home run? I picked that highlight specifically because I had a bet, and that home run won me the bet. That play, I remember I came on, and I'm saying, you know how when you take a first 5 innings bet, you go that team -0.5, so they only have to win by 1 run?
Yeah.
It was Chad Kuhl that day against Strider, and the Rockies, they couldn't hit high velocity at all. And I'm like, and I had Strider over Ks. And I was like, he's going to strike out 10, 12 batters. In that game, I think he had 14 Ks. And Chad Kuhl actually was dealing against Strider. And I was like, oh my God.
Freak starts last year, which is the craziest part. He had a couple fire starts.
Yeah, and I've been at your apartment where sometimes I'm on the opposite end of a 5th inning home run that ruins it. But that home run by Michael Harris not only gave them, I think, a 1-0 lead, but then I think another home run was hit in that inning, and I ended up winning the bet because they had to win by 2 runs through 5 innings, which is not unheard of. It can happen all the time, but from a bet perspective,
it's hard.
Never should do that. But I was so confident in it, and it hit. Thank you, Chad Kuhl, and your terrible sinker. The worst pitch in Major League Baseball. For all those watching on YouTube, if you could hit us with a like, hit that subscribe button, comment what are the worst pitches that you thought in the 2022 MLB season, because remember, this is not 2021. This is not throughout their history. This was the worst performing pitches of the 2022 MLB season.